decision-making commercial acumen, a public service ethos and awareness of a public media profile, an understanding of commitment to the Treaty of Waitangi, a high standard of personal integrity and clear communication and ability to debate in a reasoned manner. Effective teamwork and collaboration, the ability to think strategically, risk assessment and contingency management, commitment to the principles of good corporate citizenship, and understanding of the wider interest of the publicly accountable shareholder. So it's quite an exhaustive list.
Well, that's certainly Ms. Mayor, sounds like it doesn't rule out councillors for running for those positions. Can I just ask a supplementary question?
Yeah, sure.
In light of that, if a councillor didn't have governance experience, is there any way that can be waived, because we're wanting to put on the appointment panel's wanting to put on a more diverse skill? They're looking for something else, another quality, to add to the diversity of the board.
I would imagine that what the board would be looking for is a range. Not everybody will have each one of those skills in equal measure, so they'd be looking at a combination of skills amongst the directors to make sure that they had all of the needs actually met by the collective. But I would still expect, as a minimum, those three basic things that I mentioned before would be held by all of those applying for the job. Can I just apologise? It's been drawn to my attention that I still talk like I am in the debating chamber.
Thank you.
It may be a little bit loud.
No, it's good. Keep going.
Some of my colleagues in Wellington used to complain about that, but I'll need to be reminded from time to time as I make this adjustment. The next question is from Councillor Casey.
Well, I've got two questions, Mr. Mayor. My first one is, why did you remove the two councillors from the boards ahead of today's meeting?
Because if you look at the sections that govern my actions, that once you have served 2 terms, you're no longer eligible for reappointment, and your terms expire at the end. That's my understanding.
Bollocks.
Why didn't you make us aware of that fact and that you were doing so then?
Well, all of you.
Did it?
All of you were aware, better than me or the new members, that the outgoing council said this matter needed to be brought back to the incoming council to resolve, and the requirements upon us is that we do that at the start of the triennial term, and that's exactly what I've followed, those requirements that are set out in our governance manual.
Can I read out the relevant section?
Yeah, please.
Expiry of tenure. Upon expiry of that 3-year term, the directors retire from the board, and subject to the board's members' performance and skills continuing to be relevant to the board, may be eligible for reappointment. There's a second element to this policy, which is the normal expectation that unless exceptional circumstances apply, a director will serve 2 3-year terms. In the case of the current council directors, they both serve 2 3-year terms.
What would be exceptional circumstances, David?
The exceptional circumstances that are highlighted in the manual, which is in 4.3, they include that the board member has a particular skill that would be hard to replace. The board has undergone substantial change and stability is needed. The director has institutional knowledge not held by other directors, or a director is a likely successor as a chair. So those are sort of illustrations, but it's not a mechanical process. It's a case of judgment in each case.
So who would make the decision on the exceptional circumstances that might allow the 2 directors?
I think under the policy, the expectation is that it would be the Appointments and Review Committee.
Yeah. So that hasn't met yet, which is back to my initial question. Why did you remove them ahead of looking at exceptional circumstances?
This policy is very clear. They have retired until they'll get to be reconsidered for appointment.
Can I read out?
Yeah.
Can I read out the actual wording, Councillor Casey? It says, this is under 4.3, term of appointment. Any board member reappointed for a second term retires upon expiry of the additional 3-year term. I didn't remove anyone. That is removed by the rules that you as a former council all adopted.
Correct.
Okay, further questions? Denise Lee.
My second question?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep. Councillor Casey.
My second question is about, do you know how at the moment I manage a multi-million-dollar budget of Auckland Council. What skill set, how am I going to grow the new skill set that would make me eligible to be on the board of Auckland Transport?
I think the skill set is exactly as the Auditor General points out. They need to be the same skills that we would require of any director being appointed to that board. Her recommendation to us and every other local authority in the country is that we apply the same standard to councillors seeking appointment as we would to anybody else. I defer to her expertise and the work that she and her office put considerable time into producing and then recommending to us. I think that we ignore her recommendations at our peril.
When the 20 members of this council stand for election, there is no tick sheet of skills that you need to possess or qualifications you need to have. It's about getting the vote from the people who elect you. And that's the speech.
Sorry, yeah, that's, do you want to save that one, Kathy? Okay, can we have Denise Lee, please? Councillor Denise Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So I've got two questions as well. First is, can the accountability policy, can you just confirm for me, normally an amendment to the LTP, be, and there's a suggestion here to comprehensively review it. Can it be reviewed at any time? And if so, is the mechanism, are we suggesting that go through the performance committee and then ratified by GB?
I'll just let Rose Leonard answer that question.
The accountability, through the chair, the accountability policy has to be approved through a special consultative procedure. The opportunity we have to do that through the LTP, and it must be included in the LTP. So the most cost-efficient way to do that is through the LTP consultation. And it would, in normal circumstances, the approval of the accountability policy would come back to the Finance and Performance Committee.
Right, okay, thank you. And second question is, if councillors are eligible for, we go through the review, the report, ratified, if councillors are eligible for the Auckland Transport Board and do so apply, and then we have a performance committee panel, well, one, possibly sometimes two members of that panel interviewing, and they find themselves across the table with another councillor. How would that roll out in terms of conflict? And furthermore, if the chief executive is on that interview panel and we appoint him, how would that play out if in fact you find yourself across the table from a colleague?
Through the chair.
Yeah.
We have considered that, and we would comprise a different interview panel for the councillor directors. We feel that would be inappropriate for a councillor to be interviewing another councillor. So we could hire an independent person. As you know, the IMSB have been part of our panels before. That would be appropriate if, in those circumstances, probably, at the will of the committee. But we could just, at the will of that committee, we could comprise another panel.
But we always have an IMSB, is that?
We have in the past.
Yeah. So are you suggesting possibly two IMSB in that instance?
Through the chair, I was suggesting one, but you could carry on with that practice.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just getting my papers back. If we were to adopt the recommendations that you have put up, there are no timeframes in the recommendations, and that does leave a gap between when we started and whenever you think this is all going to happen. So what are we going to do? Well, two questions. First of all, what are we going to do in the interim, in the gap that we have now? Currently, there is no council representative on AT. And secondly, could you please add to your recommendations when you think you would like to have the appointments of the council positions on AT completed by?
Yeah. To answer the second first, I'd like to do that as soon as possible, but of course we need to go through that process thoroughly at Appointments and Performance Review Committee, but I see no reason why that can't be on the agenda of that committee, which is meeting, I think, next week, 23rd of November, week after next. We would want to progress that as soon as possible. We have a third vacancy on the committee at the moment there because there is a vacancy for an independent director. The process that I think I'd want to follow in the interim is have the chair of the board report to all councillors on the agenda items that any board meeting is considering, and the any risks or implications arising out of any of the decisions that they have made. So we can, in the interim, maybe it would be a good thing to do as an ongoing policy, but in the interim certainly require that of the chair of the board, and that would be something that I would want to see happen, so that we are kept up to date. I'm mindful of the fact that, as I understand it, councillors serving on the board did not regularly report back to the committee. If I'm wrong about that, please correct me.
Can I ask a supplementary question, sorry, just to
Yeah,
that
sure.
end? Because one of the...
You're wrong about that. I reported back to the Infrastructure Committee and the Transport Committee, so you're wrong about that.
From every meeting, Mike?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
It's not legal.
Well, I stand corrected in that case, but the way that we can do it doesn't detract from my answer to you, that we simply require the chair of the board to formally report in writing to each councillor what the issues are on the agenda and risks and implications. I think that's quite important.
So my supplementary question around that is, because one of the 3 tools we've got to use, and one that we haven't, I don't think, used very well, or at all actually before, is the accountability policy, which of course sets out our expectations for CCOs. And so I suppose I'm conscious that, again, on the timeframes, you know, the year has started, the CCOs are off on their own little, you know, work programs, and our expectations have yet to be, we haven't set those, we haven't sort of tightened those. So are you pretty much saying that you don't really think this will be in effect till potentially next financial year? Because how will they change? I mean, I think what you're putting together is good, but the key for me is to set out our expectations first.
Yep.
And
No, absolutely. I
I'm
don't
really
think
keen to see your
I don't think I could have brought this paper to an earlier meeting of the governing body than I have.
Yeah.
We've given priority to that.
Implementation.
Yeah. So to do it as quickly as possible, but not to make any shortcuts in terms of getting it right, I think is my broad answer. Okay, we now have questions from, sorry, I've got Councillor Wayne Walker. I've got a list of people here. Dick, I'll come back to you. Wayne.
Sure.
Councillor Walker, I'm sorry.
I've just got a technical question about the difference between Auckland Transport as compared to, say, other CCOs. And I guess the context is not so long ago we had a review of our council-controlled organisations, and for a number of them there was an option on the table about bringing those council-controlled organisations inside. And the rationale around that was because, frankly, most of them are doing core business. And if we look at Auckland Transport, it's doing core business, it's doing business that we do.
If I take that as a question, Councillor Walker, can I just reply to that? We don't have the ability to do that. That's set in legislation. Yep. So, you know, that may be an option that's a perfectly appropriate one for us to debate in the future, but we have no legislative authority to do that.
Okay, and when that review was underway, it was recognised that we didn't have authority, but we can put those sorts of options and look for changes on the part of the government. So we're not a passive observer, we're actually actively involved. So I would suggest one of the options at some point is we could bring Auckland Transport into the council fold if we wanted to, particularly because it's not just a transport function, there's an inherent planning function there.
Sorry, Councillor Walker,
really
that is a statement rather than a question.
I know.
But yeah, that is an option we can look at. You know, and I know. So let's move on with the questions, please.
So while this report and the comments from the Auditor General make reference to advantages of having board members outside of CCOs, is it not conceivable that there are significant advantages to having a member of the council on the board for the reasons that I've indicated? It's core council business.
Yeah.
And
sorry,
especially given the
I think
confidentiality.
we've got the question, and the answer is set out in the on page 7 of the report, and the pros and cons. I've tried to be fair about this to say what are the advantages of having councillor directors and what are the disadvantages, and that's taken from the Office of the Auditor General's report. So they are set out there. I'd like to get through the questions quite quickly. I'm conscious of the fact that it's after 3 o'clock and many of us have got a range of other appointments. So can I move Councillor Lee, Mike Lee?
No,